The woman who made my life a living hell, my stepmother, is now begging me to convince my dad not to divorce her. But I told her frankly that she gave me nothing but trauma and deserves no loyalty after everything she did. I'm a 28-year-old female, and I genuinely need some perspective on this situation. My stepmother, Patricia, 45, has been calling me non-stop, pleading with me to persuade my dad, Marcus, 52, against divorcing her. I flat out refused. And ever since, she's been sending me vindictive messages. Some people think I'm being petty, but I need to know if I'm actually in the wrong here. Let me start from the beginning. My parents divorced when I was 12. Their marriage was absolutely miserable. They argued constantly about everything imaginable: money, work, my mom's cooking, my dad's friends. Nearly every fight concluded with one of them sleeping on the couch or storming out for hours. I spent most of my childhood listening to slamming doors and shattering dishes. The divorce announcement happened during a typical Tuesday dinner. My dad cleared his throat and declared they were divorcing. My mom simply nodded and asked me to pass the salt. I said okay, and continued eating my spaghetti. Both of them stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. My mom started crying, and my dad accused me of not caring about our family's collapse. I honestly didn't know what they expected me to do. I'd been anticipating this moment for years. After the divorce, I lived with my mom during the weekdays and spent weekends with my dad. He moved into a modest apartment across town. For the initial few months, things were surprisingly peaceful. We'd watch movies, order pizza, and he'd help me with my math homework. Those weekends quickly became the highlight of my week. Then, Patricia entered the picture. My dad introduced her as a colleague from his accounting firm, but she knew far too much about me for someone he'd supposedly just started dating. She inquired about my science grades and even brought up my piano recital from months prior. When I pressed her on how she knew all this, she smiled and claimed my dad talked about me incessantly at work. Something about that smile made my stomach churn. One Saturday morning, while my dad was out getting groceries, I asked Patricia point blank if she'd been seeing my dad before the divorce. She simply laughed and admitted she'd been helping him through his marital problems for over a year. She seemed almost proud of it. I then asked if that meant they'd been together while my parents were still married. She winked and said, "Some relationships are more complicated than a 12-year-old could understand." I never told my mom. She finally seemed happier after the divorce, and I didn't want to destroy that. Patricia soon started staying over every weekend. My dad would leave me with a babysitter on Saturday nights so he could take her out. He'd often return home drunk around midnight, completely forgetting to check on me. Our cherished pizza and movie nights ceased. Instead, I'd eat cereal for dinner while they whispered intimately in his bedroom. After 6 months, Patricia moved in permanently. The very first thing she did was remove all the pictures of me and my dad from the living room. She declared the frames clashed with her new decorations, replacing them with generic landscape photos. When I voiced my complaint to my dad, he simply said we needed to make Patricia feel welcome in her new home. The weekend before my 14th birthday, I returned from my mom's house to find my bedroom utterly transformed. Patricia had painted over my vibrant purple walls with a drab beige. She'd discarded my posters and swapped my colorful bedspread for plain white sheets. My cherished stuffed animals were gone, relegated to a garbage bag in the hallway. I immediately burst into tears upon seeing my room. Patricia walked in and informed me that my old decorations were childish and embarrassing for a teenager. She actually said I should thank her for helping me grow up. When my dad came home, I tried to show him what she'd done. He glanced around the room and commented that it looked more mature. Patricia stood behind him, smirking. That night, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. Patricia was shouting that I was ungrateful and spoiled. She insisted I should live with my mom permanently so she and my dad could start fresh without dealing with teenage tantrums. My dad, in turn, kept saying I was merely adjusting to changes. 3 months later, they secretly married at City Hall without informing anyone. They announced it when my dad picked me up for the weekend. Patricia flashed her ring and declared I could call her Mom now. I retorted that I already had a mom. Her smile instantly vanished. At their wedding reception, I sat in the corner eating cake while Patricia's friends showered her with congratulations. I overheard one of them inquire how she felt about becoming a stepmother. Patricia, having consumed some wine, spoke louder than she intended. She candidly stated that having a stepdaughter was the absolute worst part of marrying my dad. She wished my parents' divorce had been nastier, so my mom would have received full custody, sparing her from dealing with me every weekend. Her friend then asked if she'd ever conveyed these feelings to my dad. Patricia chuckled, responding that my dad felt so guilty about the divorce he'd do anything to keep me happy. She planned to wait until after their honeymoon to start setting boundaries, adding that I needed to learn their house had new rules. I feigned needing to use the bathroom and called my mom to pick me up early, claiming I had a headache. The boundaries were implemented immediately after their honeymoon. Patricia presented me with a rigorous list of chores to complete every weekend: vacuuming, dishes, laundry, cleaning bathrooms. She claimed that contributing to household work would teach me responsibility. When I finished everything on the list, she'd miraculously find more tasks: organizing closets, scrubbing baseboards, washing windows. She also stopped buying any food I liked. The refrigerator contained only items she and my dad ate: spicy foods, seafood, unfamiliar vegetables. When I requested familiar snacks, she informed me I was old enough to develop sophisticated tastes. I started bringing granola bars from my mom's house. Patricia began scrutinizing and criticizing my every move. My hair was too messy, my clothes too casual, I walked too loudly, I talked too much during dinner. I didn't help enough with cooking. And when I did try to help, I was doing it wrong and making more work for her. My dad, meanwhile, began working increasingly long hours at his firm, leaving for work at 6 a.m. and returning after 8 p.m. Patricia explained he was trying to make partner and needed to focus on his career. She constantly reminded me that his success was contingent on maintaining a peaceful home environment. By the time I turned 16, weekends at my dad's house felt utterly like a punishment. I'd wake up to a fresh list of chores taped to my bedroom door. Patricia would meticulously inspect my work, forcing me to redo anything that failed to meet her impossible standards. She never once deemed my work good enough. There was always something wrong with how I'd folded the towels or mopped the kitchen floor. One Saturday morning, I overslept and missed the bus to my part-time job at a local bookstore. I desperately asked Patricia to drive me, as I was already 2 hours late. She was seated at the kitchen table, calmly reading a magazine. She glanced up and coldly stated that transportation was my responsibility. She suggested I call in sick if I couldn't figure out how to get there. I ended up walking 4 miles to work in the pouring rain. My manager sent me home because my clothes were soaked and I looked utterly miserable. I lost a full day's pay. That incident ignited a resolve in me. I began to plan my escape. I started meticulously saving every dollar I earned at the bookstore. I researched bus schedules between my dad's city and my mom's town, discovering I could purchase a one-way ticket for $38. The final straw occurred 2 weeks before my 17th birthday. I had been eagerly anticipating it because my mom planned a small party with my friends. Patricia overheard me discussing the party details with my mom on the phone. After I hung up, she announced that my birthday celebration at their house would be a quiet family dinner. She'd already made reservations at an unfamiliar restaurant. I insisted I wanted to spend my birthday with my friends, as planned. Patricia declared that birthdays at their house now followed their traditions. She'd ordered a cake and invited my dad's coworkers, then accused me of being selfish for wanting to change plans. When my dad came home, I explained my existing birthday plans with my mom. Patricia immediately burst into tears, claiming I was rejecting her efforts to include me in their family. My dad suggested a compromise, dinner with Patricia's family friends, and then I could see my friends afterward. The dinner was every bit as dreadful as I'd anticipated. Patricia's friends peppered me with questions about school and college plans, while I nervously picked at unfamiliar food. Patricia constantly interrupted my answers to interject her own commentary. When someone asked about my interests, she blithely stated I was still figuring out who I wanted to be. After dinner, Patricia announced it was too late for me to go out with friends, claiming she'd already informed them the celebration was canceled. I asked when she'd called my friends. She insisted she'd contacted my mom earlier that week to coordinate everything. From my bedroom, I called my mom. She confirmed Patricia had never called her and had been waiting for me to come home all evening. My friends had also been texting, wondering where I was. I packed my clothes into my backpack and climbed out my bedroom window. The bus station was a 3-mile walk. I used the money I'd been meticulously saving to buy a ticket home. My mom was waiting at the bus station when I arrived at midnight. We didn't speak much during the drive to her house. She simply made me hot chocolate and said we'd figure everything out in the morning. The next day, my mom called my dad. They had the loudest phone argument I'd ever heard. My dad accused my mom of manipulating me against Patricia. My mom, in turn, listed every single terrible thing Patricia had been doing. My dad dismissed it all, saying I was exaggerating and being dramatic. My mom then threatened to call a lawyer, which finally got my dad's attention. He vowed he'd talk to Patricia and ensure things changed. 3 days later, my dad showed up at my mom's house. He looked weary and aged beyond his years. He told me he'd spoken with Patricia about her behavior. She feigned ignorance, claiming she'd only been trying to help me mature and hadn't realized I was unhappy. She promised to try harder to make me feel welcome. I reluctantly agreed to give her another chance, mostly because my dad seemed genuinely remorseful. The changes Patricia implemented were minimal at best. She ceased giving me extra chores, but otherwise barely spoke to me. She'd prepare dinner and serve my plate without making eye contact, answering my questions with curt one-word responses. The house felt like a silent library where I was forbidden to make any noise. I preferred being ignored to being constantly criticized, so I didn't complain. I simply counted down the months until I could finally leave for college. I deliberately chose a university 8 hours away from both my parents. My dad seemed hurt that I wasn't staying closer to home, but he still helped me move into my dorm. Patricia, of course, came along and spent the entire day rearranging my belongings, declaring I'd packed inefficiently and needed better organization systems. College finally gave me the necessary space to understand just how abnormal my home situation truly was. My roommate chatted excitedly about going home for holidays. Other students called their parents regularly and seemed genuinely thrilled about family visits. It hit me that most people didn't dread spending time with their own families. During my sophomore year, I met David, 30, at a campus job. He was completing his graduate degree and working as a teaching assistant. We began dating after knowing each other for 6 months. He became the first person I ever confided in, sharing the complete story about Patricia. David listened intently without interruption and concluded that Patricia's behavior sounded deliberately cruel. He pointed out that adults who target children typically continue that pattern unless someone intervenes. He suggested I might consider limiting contact with my dad and Patricia after graduation. I had never even considered that option before. I had always assumed I'd have to maintain a relationship with them forever, simply because they were family. For my 23rd birthday, my dad and Patricia sent a gift card to a restaurant in my college town. I thanked them during our monthly phone call. Patricia then got on the phone and announced she'd specifically chosen a steakhouse because I needed to expand my palate beyond vegetarian food. I've been vegetarian since I was 15, and I'd reminded them countless times over the years, particularly during holiday dinners when Patricia would only serve meat dishes. She always claimed to forget. I informed her I was still vegetarian and therefore couldn't use a gift card for a steakhouse. She retorted that vegetarianism was a teenage phase I should have outgrown by now, and accused David of influencing me to make poor dietary choices. My dad quickly took the phone back and said they'd send a different gift card, while Patricia could be heard yelling in the background about me being ungrateful and difficult. I hung up and didn't call them for 3 months. When I finally called back, my dad answered, immediately launching into apologies. He claimed Patricia had been stressed about some family issues and hadn't meant to upset me. He then asked if I'd received the replacement gift card they'd supposedly sent. They had, in fact, never sent a replacement gift card. That conversation solidified my realization. My dad would always choose Patricia over me. He would consistently make excuses for her behavior and expect me to simply accept whatever treatment she decided to dole out. I stopped calling them regularly. I'd send brief text messages on holidays and answer when they called, but I never initiated contact. Instead, I spent holidays with David's family, who treated me like their own daughter from the very first time we met. Last month, my dad called with significant news. He informed me that he and Patricia were getting divorced. He'd already filed the papers and moved into a temporary apartment. He explained they'd been having problems for years, and he'd finally decided he deserved to be happy. I simply said I was sorry to hear about their divorce. He seemed taken aback by my calm reaction, stating he'd expected me to have more questions or opinions about their marriage ending. 2 weeks ago, Patricia started calling me. The first few times, I didn't answer, not recognizing the number. When I finally picked up, she was in tears, pleading with me to help save her marriage. She insisted my dad was being unreasonable and impulsive, claiming they could resolve their problems if he just agreed to counseling. She believed I had influence over my dad and could persuade him to reconsider the divorce. I firmly told her I wasn't getting involved in their marital issues. She started crying even harder, declaring I owed her loyalty as her stepdaughter, and that family members should support each other during difficult times. I reminded her that she'd spent years telling me I wasn't truly part of their family. She then attempted to backtrack, claiming those were misunderstandings, and she'd always tried her best to be a good stepmother. I informed her I didn't wish to continue the conversation and hung up. She's been relentlessly calling and texting me ever since. Her messages began as desperate pleas for help, but have grown increasingly hostile over time. She's branded me selfish, vindictive, and a terrible daughter. She even stated, "My dad is making a mistake, and I'll regret not helping when their divorce ruins his finances." David thinks I should block her number and completely disregard the entire situation. My mom agrees I owe Patricia nothing after her treatment of me, but a part of me still wonders if I'm being petty by refusing to help. Perhaps I should try to convince my dad to give their marriage another chance, especially if the divorce will hurt him financially. So, am I the jerk for refusing to help Patricia save her marriage to my dad? Update 1. A lot has transpired since my initial post. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice. Reading your responses truly helped me realize I wasn't irrational for feeling the way I did about Patricia. The harassment from Patricia intensified after I posted. She started calling David directly when I stopped answering her calls, telling him I was manipulative and trying to destroy her marriage out of spite. David hung up on her, but she persistently called his work number. She also somehow obtained my mom's phone number and called her repeatedly. My mom listened to Patricia rant about ungrateful stepchildren for about 5 minutes before telling her never to call again. Patricia then sent my mom several lengthy text messages, falsely claiming I'd been lying about her treatment of me during my teenage years. My mom screenshotted all of Patricia's messages and forwarded them to me. Some of what Patricia wrote was completely unhinged. She alleged I'd been a difficult child who required constant discipline, asserting she'd tried to teach me responsibility and respect, but I'd been too spoiled by my mom's permissive parenting to learn proper behavior. Reading those messages made my hands tremble. Seeing Patricia's warped version of events in writing resurrected memories I'd tried so hard to bury. She genuinely believed she was the victim in our relationship. David suggested I show the messages to my dad, arguing he deserved to know what Patricia was saying about me behind his back. I was hesitant to get further entangled in their divorce drama, but the harassment was significantly impacting my daily life. I called my dad last Tuesday evening. He sounded weary when he answered, but seemed relieved to hear from me. He mentioned he'd been meaning to call but didn't want to burden me with his personal problems. I then detailed Patricia's relentless calls and messages. He remained silent for a long time after I finished explaining everything. Then he asked me to forward him screenshots of her messages to my mom and David. He called me back an hour later, his voice sounding entirely different, angrier than I'd heard him in years. He said he'd just gotten off the phone with Patricia, and she'd initially denied everything. When he read her own words back to her, she weakly claimed she'd been emotional and didn't mean what she'd written. My dad unequivocally stated that Patricia's behavior toward me had been unacceptable. He tearfully apologized for not protecting me better when I was younger, admitting he'd been so singularly focused on trying to make his second marriage work that he'd ignored obvious signs of Patricia's deep resentment toward me. That conversation felt utterly surreal. I'd waited 15 years for my dad to acknowledge that Patricia had treated me badly. Hearing him finally validate my experiences was both profoundly relieving and intensely infuriating. Why had it taken him so long to see what had been so glaringly obvious to everyone else? My dad asked if I'd be willing to meet him for coffee to discuss everything further. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity about what else he might confess. We met at a cafe near my apartment last Saturday morning. My dad looked noticeably older and thinner than I remembered, having lost weight since moving out of the house he'd shared with Patricia. He began by apologizing again for Patricia's recent behavior. He revealed he'd had his lawyer send her a cease and desist letter demanding she stop contacting me and David, warning that any violation of the order could result in legal consequences. Then he revealed something utterly unexpected. He explained the reason he'd finally decided to divorce Patricia wasn't simply general unhappiness. 6 months prior, he'd uncovered her financial deceit. Patricia had persuaded him to add her name to several of his investment accounts after they married, claiming it would be easier for her to manage their finances if she had access to everything. My dad, trusting her, signed the paperwork without a careful review. Recently, he'd received a notice about unusual activity on one of his retirement accounts. Upon investigation, he discovered Patricia had been systematically moving money into a separate account solely in her name, transferring almost $40,000 over 2 years. When my dad confronted her, Patricia tried to claim she'd been saving money for home improvements and vacation plans, insisting she'd wanted to surprise him with the projects. However, my dad found records proving she'd been using the money for personal expenses, clothes, spa treatments, dinners with her friends. My dad admitted that discovering Patricia's financial betrayal forced him to reevaluate their entire relationship. He'd started paying closer attention to how she treated other people and realized she'd been manipulating him for years. He confessed. He'd always known Patricia disliked me, but he'd dismissed it as normal step-family adjustment issues, convincing himself that time would improve our relationship. Looking back, he could clearly see that Patricia had deliberately tried to push me out of his life. My dad tearfully asked if I could forgive him for choosing Patricia over me so many times. He said he understood if I needed time to rebuild trust between us. I told him I appreciated his apology, but I wasn't ready to pretend our relationship could instantly return to normal. Too much damage had occurred for us to simply move forward without acknowledging it. He assured me he understood and would respect whatever boundaries I needed to set. Before we left the cafe, my dad shared one more detail. Patricia had been calling his sister and his parents, asking them to convince him not to get divorced. She'd falsely told them I was manipulating him against her and poisoning his family. Relationships. My dad had called his sister to correct Patricia's lies. His sister admitted she'd always thought Patricia was cold toward me, but hadn't wanted to interfere in my dad's marriage, now regretting not speaking up sooner. It was incredibly strange to learn that other family members had noticed Patricia's behavior, but chosen to remain silent. I pondered how different things might have been if someone had confronted Patricia years ago. My dad walked me to my car after coffee, expressing his hope that we could stay in touch more regularly now that Patricia wouldn't be influencing his decisions about our relationship. I told him I'd think about it. The harassment from Patricia ceased entirely after my dad sent the cease and desist letter. I haven't heard from her in over a week, which has been an immense relief. David believes my dad's apology was long overdue but appears genuine. He's encouraged me to consider giving my dad an opportunity to prove he's changed. But he's also reminded me that I don't owe anyone a relationship simply because we're related. I'm still processing everything my dad revealed. Learning about Patricia's financial theft certainly clarifies why she was so desperate to save their marriage, but it also makes me question what other deceptions she perpetrated throughout their relationship. For now, I'm taking things day by day. I'm not ready to completely forgive my dad, but I am willing to observe if he follows through on his promises to improve. I'll post another update if anything significant occurs with the divorce proceedings. Update 2. The situation with Patricia and my dad has grown considerably more complicated since my last update. I hadn't planned to post again, but some significant developments have occurred that I need to get off my chest. First, the good news. Patricia has completely stopped attempting to contact me. My dad's lawyer's cease and desist letter worked precisely as intended. I haven't received any calls, texts, or messages from her in over a month. My dad and I have been speaking on the phone once a week. Our conversations remain somewhat awkward, but they're steadily becoming easier. He's been updating me on the divorce proceedings and inquiring about my job and my relationship with David. It feels bizarre to have regular contact with him after years of barely speaking. 3 weeks ago, my dad called with unexpected news. He informed me Patricia's lawyer had contacted his lawyer with a settlement offer. Patricia was prepared to agree to the divorce without contesting it, but she demanded half of my dad's retirement savings and alimony payments for 10 years. My dad said his lawyer had literally laughed at the demand. Apparently, Patricia had signed a prenuptial agreement before their wedding that severely restricted what she could claim in a divorce. She would be entitled to only a small settlement, based on assets they acquired together during the marriage, having no claim to my dad's pre-existing retirement funds or long-term alimony. I asked my dad why Patricia would even attempt to demand money she wasn't legally entitled to. He said his lawyer believed she either genuinely didn't comprehend the prenup she'd signed or was banking on my dad not wanting to endure a lengthy court battle. My dad seemed immensely relieved that the prenup would safeguard most of his assets. He admitted he'd been concerned about the financial impact of divorce, but now he realized Patricia would have virtually no leverage in settlement negotiations. That phone call made me fully grasp why Patricia had been so desperate for my help. She hadn't been fighting to salvage a marriage she loved. She'd been trying to circumvent the severe financial consequences of divorce. 2 weeks ago, my dad called me with much more significant news. He revealed he'd discovered something that would likely terminate his marriage immediately and irrevocably. Patricia had been having an affair. My dad found out purely by accident. Patricia's phone was buzzing with text messages while she was in the shower. My dad grabbed the phone to silence it and saw a notification from someone named Marcus with a message that was unequivocally romantic in nature. Marcus, it turned out, was the husband of one of Patricia's close friends, Rebecca. My dad knew Rebecca and her husband from social gatherings over the years. Marcus and Patricia had been secretly meeting for over 8 months. My dad confronted Patricia when she emerged from the shower. She initially denied everything, but my dad had already perused enough of their text conversations to know she was lying. The messages contained explicit details about their relationship and future rendezvous. When Patricia realized she could no longer deny the affair, she immediately started making excuses. She claimed her relationship with Marcus had blossomed because she'd been lonely and unhappy in her marriage. She asserted my dad had been emotionally distant and focused only on work. She also argued her inability to have children had made her desperate for emotional connection elsewhere, stating Marcus understood her struggles with infertility in ways my dad never had. My dad said listening to Patricia's endless justifications had made him realize how profoundly manipulative she'd always been. She was attempting to make him feel responsible for her decision to cheat. He then told Patricia he wanted her out of their house by the end of the week. She started crying and begging him to reconsider, but he firmly stated the marriage was over, regardless of what she did next. Patricia temporarily moved in with her sister. She's been attempting to convince my dad to go to counseling and work through their problems, but he's steadfastly refused to consider it. The affair's discovery has simplified the divorce process considerably. Patricia's adultery further invalidates her prenuptial agreement, meaning she'll receive the absolute minimum possible settlement. My dad's lawyer expects the divorce to be finalized within a few months, now that Patricia has no reasonable basis to contest it. Yesterday, my dad called with yet another update concerning Patricia. He informed me Rebecca had discovered the affair between Patricia and Marcus. Apparently, Rebecca grew suspicious when Marcus started working late more frequently and became secretive with his phone. Rebecca hired a private investigator who unequivocally confirmed the affair and furnished her with detailed evidence of Patricia and Marcus's illicit relationship. Rebecca confronted Marcus, who confessed everything and desperately pleaded for forgiveness. Rebecca then called my dad to inform him of the investigation's findings. She also apologized for not realizing what Patricia had been doing sooner, stating she'd considered Patricia a close friend and felt utterly betrayed by her. Deception. Rebecca and Marcus are now separated and likely heading toward their own divorce as well. Marcus has been staying at a hotel while they work out custody arrangements for their 2 young children. My dad expressed sympathy for Rebecca and the kids, but admitted he was also relieved to possess undeniable proof of Patricia's infidelity. Now, he no longer has to question if he made the right decision about ending his marriage. I've been reflecting extensively on Patricia since learning about her affair. A part of me feels a profound sense of vindication because her cheating unequivocally proved she was never the victim she masqueraded as. But another part of me just feels utterly exhausted by her drama. David sagely pointed out that Patricia's affair was likely not her first betrayal. She'd already demonstrated her willingness to lie and steal when she pilfered money from my dad's accounts. Cheating was simply another manifestation of deception that fit her established pattern. My relationship with my dad continues to mend, slowly. He's been more forthright about his past mistakes, and more receptive when I discuss how Patricia's treatment impacted me. I don't believe we'll ever achieve a perfect father-daughter relationship, but we might eventually build something functional. I've also been contemplating whether I want Patricia to know I'm aware of her affair. A part of me yearns to call her and reveal my knowledge of her infidelity, just to witness her reaction. However, David believes any contact with Patricia would be a grave error, even if it feels momentarily satisfying. For now, I'm completely disengaging from the drama. My dad can navigate his divorce without my involvement, and Patricia can contend with the repercussions of her choices without my input. I'll likely post one final update once the divorce is officially finalized, but I sincerely hope the worst of this situation is now behind us. Update 3. 4 months have passed since my last update, and I wanted to share the final resolution of everything. Many people have been requesting a concluding update, so here's what ultimately transpired. With Patricia and my dad's divorce. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks ago. Patricia ended up with virtually nothing, precisely as my dad's lawyer had predicted. Due to the prenuptial agreement and her affair, she received only a meager settlement covering half the value of furniture and household items they acquired together during their marriage. She received no alimony and no claim to any of my dad's retirement funds or other assets. Patricia attempted to fight the settlement until the very end. Her lawyer withdrew from the case 2 months ago after she ceased paying his bills. She represented herself during the final proceedings, which unfolded exactly as one might anticipate. My dad recounted that Patricia spent most of her court time vehemently arguing that the prenuptial agreement was unfair and should be invalidated. The judge patiently listened to her complaints for about 10 minutes before explaining that she had signed the agreement voluntarily with her own lawyer present. The judge further noted that Patricia's adultery had voided several clauses that might otherwise have entitled her to additional money. Patricia stormed out of the courthouse, crying and shouting that my dad had ruined her life. My dad's lawyer advised him to meticulously document the outburst in case Patricia attempted to harass him later, but she seems to have finally accepted that the marriage is irrevocably over. My dad moved back into the house he'd shared with Patricia after she permanently vacated. He's been gradually redecorating and meticulously erasing all traces of their life together. He expressed how good it feels to reclaim his own space. Patricia has been residing with her sister since the affair came to light, but that arrangement apparently isn't going well. My dad heard through mutual acquaintances that Patricia's sister is utterly weary of financially supporting her and has issued an ultimatum: find her own place by the end of this month. Patricia has been actively seeking full-time work, but she hasn't held a steady job in over 6 years. She quit her position at my dad's accounting firm after they married, and has only engaged in occasional freelance bookkeeping since then. Most employers require more recent experience than she can offer. The affair between Patricia and Marcus also disintegrated rapidly once it was no longer clandestine. Marcus decided to fight earnestly for his marriage with Rebecca after realizing he could lose custody of his children. He severed all contact with Patricia and began marriage counseling with Rebecca. My dad informed me that Rebecca and Marcus are still separated, but are actively working on their relationship. Rebecca's primary condition for reconciliation was that Marcus have zero contact with Patricia, which he agreed to immediately. Patricia reportedly tried to persuade Marcus to leave Rebecca and start a new life with her, but he adamantly refused. She sent him several desperate messages imploring him to reconsider, but Marcus blocked her number and threatened to obtain a restraining order if she didn't leave him alone. So, Patricia lost her husband, her home, her financial security, and her boyfriend, all within a few short months. She unequivocally brought all of it upon herself, but a small part of me almost feels a pang of pity for how utterly her life unraveled. My relationship with my dad has continued to steadily improve. We speak on the phone weekly and have met for coffee multiple times. He's been making a sincere effort to rebuild our bond, and I've been cautiously optimistic about affording him another chance. My dad has also been attending individual counseling to process issues from his marriage with Patricia. He shared that his therapist has helped him understand how he inadvertently enabled Patricia's detrimental behavior toward me by refusing to establish clear boundaries. He's now committed to never letting anyone treat me that way again. Last month, my dad invited David and me to dinner at his house. It was the first time I'd stepped inside that house since I was a teenager. My dad had meticulously removed all vestiges of Patricia and restored some of the photos of us that she'd made him take down years ago. Dinner unfolded better than I'd anticipated. My dad inquired about David's work and interests, and David was polite, though not overly effusive. They seemed to respect each other, which was all I could ask for. After dinner, My dad showed us some enhancements he'd made to the house. He'd transformed Patricia's old office space into a guest bedroom and said David and I were welcome to stay there any time we visited. It felt surreal to consider sleeping in that house again, but I genuinely appreciated the gesture. My dad also informed us he'd been contemplating early retirement. At 52, he has sufficient savings to cease working in a few years if he chooses. He expressed a desire to travel and spend more time with family while he's still healthy enough to enjoy it. I cautiously asked if family included me. He affirmed I was the primary reason he was considering retirement, wanting to make up for lost time and build stronger relationships with the people who truly mattered to him. David and I have also been discussing getting engaged. We've been together for 3 years now and feel ready to take the next significant step. David mentioned he'd like to ask my dad for his blessing, which genuinely surprised me. I didn't think he cared for such traditional gestures. David explained that he believed asking my dad's permission might help further repair our family relationship. He said he could see how profoundly it meant to me to have my dad's support again, and he wanted to honor that connection. I told David he didn't require my dad's permission to propose, but he insisted he wanted to include my dad in the process. He explained that he'd spent years witnessing my dad's failure to protect me from Patricia, and now he wanted to demonstrate to my dad what it truly looked like when someone genuinely had my best interests at heart. We're planning to visit my dad next month so David can have that conversation with him. I'm naturally nervous about it, but also incredibly excited to see my dad's reaction. As for Patricia, I haven't had any contact with her since this entire ordeal began. I have absolutely no idea where she's living now or what she's doing with her life, and I genuinely don't particularly care. Sometimes I ponder if she ever considers how profoundly differently things could have unfolded if she had simply treated me with basic kindness when I was a child. She could have had a stepdaughter who truly cared about her well-being and a marriage that might have endured. Instead, she chose cruelty and manipulation, and now she's confronting the stark consequences of those choices completely alone. I do not forgive Patricia for the years of emotional abuse she inflicted upon me. I don't wish her well or hope she finds happiness, but I also no longer actively wish her harm. She has become utterly irrelevant to my life, which feels like the most optimal outcome. My dad and I will likely never achieve a perfect relationship. Far too much transpired during my teenage years for us to simply pretend everything is fine now, but we are constructing something new, founded on honesty and mutual respect, and that feels entirely sufficient. I'm immensely grateful to everyone who supported me throughout this challenging situation. Reading your comments helped me realize I deserved far better treatment than Patricia had given me. Thank you for validating my experiences and empowering me to prioritize my own well-being. This will be my final update unless something truly major transpires. But I don't anticipate any more drama from Patricia. She seems to have finally learned that actions carry consequences, even if it took her 45 years to grasp that fundamental truth. Now, let's transition to the next story. Story 2. My brother-in-law attempted to steal my business while living rent-free in my house. I promptly evicted him, and my wife surprisingly sided with him. 3 months later, he was arrested for scamming others. I'm John, 32, and I've been married for the past 4 years to Zoe, who is 30. We met during our second year of college. Our lecturer paired us together for an entrepreneurship class project. Throughout that project, I was captivated by her sharp intellect and aggressive, innovative ideas. We spent countless nights in the library, fueled by cheap coffee and grand dreams, meticulously crafting business plans we were convinced would revolutionize the world. Post-graduation, when I decided to launch my own marketing agency, the initial period was incredibly challenging. I worked out of my parents' garage that first year, subsisting on ramen noodles and sheer determination. Zoe was my unwavering support during this era. Even though she'd secured a position at a major finance firm in the city, She dedicated her weekends to helping me brainstorm ideas and pitch to potential clients. Sure enough, things gradually began to pick up, though rather slowly at first. Initially, a few small local businesses became my clients. Within another month, a mid-sized tech startup joined them. Before I knew it, I needed to start hiring employees, then even more. And now, 5 years down the line, I'm incredibly proud to say that Apex Marketing today employs 15 dedicated team members serving clients across the state. Zoe and I got married 2 years into my business journey. It was a modest ceremony. We didn't have much money, but it felt absolutely perfect for us. We vowed to always support each other's dreams, no matter what, and for the most part, we've upheld that promise. The issues began 6 months ago when Zoe's older brother, Max, 35, moved back into our city. Honestly, I'd only met Max a handful of times before, at our wedding and a couple of family Christmases, but Zoe had always spoken glowingly of him. He was her childhood hero, the cool older brother who taught her to ride a bike and defended her from bullies. Max had spent a good decade as a tech startup entrepreneur on the West Coast. He seemed destined for massive success, but for some reason it never materialized. Now, he was unemployed again. His latest venture had failed, leaving him deeply in debt. Max called Zoe, informing her he was returning home to regroup and strategize his next move. I was genuinely thrilled, believing it would be wonderful for Zoe to reconnect with her brother. I even started planning ways we could all spend time together. I generously offered him the opportunity to stay with us for a few weeks until he found an apartment. Those few weeks stretched into months. Initially, it was fine. Max was charming, brimming with stories about Silicon Valley, regaling us with tales of celebrity investors and lavish launch parties. However, as more time passed, I began noticing inconsistencies in his narratives. Timelines felt a bit off, and the names he mentioned seemed to shift with each recounting. Max consistently had excuses for why things weren't progressing. He couldn't find an apartment or a job. Rents were exorbitant, or the market was too challenging. He was perpetually waiting to hear results about some grand opportunity. All the while, he sat in our house playing video games on our big-screen TV and ordering from the most expensive takeout places, all at our expense, and spending his other hours doing the same elsewhere. I tried to remain patient, recalling the immense difficulties I faced when starting my own business. I wanted to give Max some leeway, but my patience was wearing thin. Our grocery bills had at least doubled, our electricity bill was exorbitant, and Max hadn't contributed a single dime to anything. Zoe continuously defended him, claiming he was under too much strain and desperately needed our help. I understood her compassion, but at a certain point, I felt we were enabling a profound sense of entitlement. Whenever I tried to discuss it with Zoe, she'd immediately become defensive, insisting, "He's family, we can't just throw him out on the street." The real trouble began when Max started taking an intrusive interest in my business. For a brief moment, I was actually flattered. He'd inquire about my operations, strategies, and client management. I thought perhaps he was genuinely trying to re-enter the working world and saw me as inspiration. But then, he began offering unsolicited advice, knowing just enough to critically dismantle our marketing campaigns, which he deemed not cutting-edge enough. He'd grandly prescribe an array of website overhauls that would have cost a fortune. He even attempted to dictate how I should manage my team, despite never having met them. I largely ignored him, but his constant input became increasingly irritating. After all, Max had never established a successful business himself, yet he presumed to lecture me on the subject. Gradually, I started avoiding coming home early, preferring to remain at the office to evade another session of Max enlightening me about business. Last week, suffering from a pounding migraine, I decided to head home early. My head throbbed as I stepped inside, only to hear Max's voice emanating from the home office. He was on the phone using my computer. Initially, I thought nothing of it. Perhaps he was finally job hunting. But then I heard him utter Mrs. Johnson's name. Mrs. Johnson is one of my most significant clients, owning a chain of boutique hotels and an early adopter of Apex's services. Her account alone constitutes a substantial portion of our yearly revenues. My jaw literally dropped when Max told Mrs. Johnson he was now co-running the agency with me and had exciting new ideas for her account. In essence, he was attempting to hijack my client relationships. I burst into the office, and Max's face drained of color. He frantically ended the call and tried to downplay it as a big mistake. He claimed he was just trying to help, thinking he could inject some Silicon Valley innovation to light a fire under the idea. But I knew better. This wasn't a clumsy, well-intentioned error. This was a calculated attempt to worm his way into my business. Who knew how long this had been happening? How many other clients had he contacted? I was absolutely livid. This was the culmination of months of pent-up frustration. I told Max he needed to leave, not just the office, but our house. I gave him 24 hours to pack his belongings and vacate. Max attempted to argue that I was overreacting, insisting he was merely trying to help the family business grow. Family business? He'd been living in my house for months, paying no rent, contributing nothing but criticism and empty promises. And now he had the audacity to claim my hard-earned success as a family business. Zoe walked in just as we were in the thick of our argument. Utterly shocked to see us yelling at each other, I fully expected her to side with me when I explained what had happened, considering Max was jeopardizing our entire livelihood. But to my astonishment, Zoe was livid with me. She accused me of acting like a child in my overreaction and of being unkind to her brother. She couldn't comprehend why I couldn't or wouldn't just work with him, or even give him a chance. It was as if she'd completely forgotten all the late nights, all the sacrifices we'd made to build this business to what it is today. I tried to explain that Max had brazenly betrayed my trust and endangered my vital client relationships. But Zoe simply wouldn't hear it. She kept repeating that it must be some mistake, and that Max would never mean to steal my business. It's now been 3 days since that fateful confrontation. Max is still here, a constant, unwelcome presence. He's acting like the aggrieved party, convinced I'm threatened by his supposedly superior business knowledge. Zoe is barely speaking to me, spending all her time with him, conspiring ways to convince me to let him stay. I feel like I'm going insane. Am I truly the jerk for trying to protect my business and wanting to evict someone who's actively trying to exploit my hospitality? How do I make Zoe understand her brother isn't the person she believes him to be? Update 1. I know it's been 2 weeks since my last post, and in that time, an astonishing amount has transpired. First and foremost, I sincerely thank all of you for your invaluable advice and support. It truly helped me gain perspective and gave me the courage to act. Immediately after my confrontation with Max, things became incredibly tense. Zoe remained furious with me, only speaking in clipped, 2-word phrases about my rough treatment of her baby brother. Max, meanwhile, embraced the role of professional victim. He would mope around the house, sighing dramatically and repeatedly claiming he'd only tried to help the family. So, I decided to step back and gather more information before making any drastic moves. I secretly spent a couple of days meticulously examining my business records, emails, and recent client interactions. What I uncovered sent shivers down my spine. So, I called Mrs. Johnson, ostensibly to check in after our last meeting, though you already know the real reason. I remarked, in a somewhat casual tone, that I hoped the call she received from my associate had been helpful. Mrs. Johnson sounded utterly confused. "Oh, you mean your brother-in-law?" she clarified. He seemed nice, but I was quite surprised when he started talking about completely overhauling our marketing strategy. My heart plummeted. I inquired of Mrs. Johnson how long ago this conversation had occurred. "Oh, about 3 weeks ago," she replied. "He's called a couple of times since then, actually." 3 weeks. Max had been actively contacting my clients behind my back for 3 weeks. I thanked Mrs. Johnson and hastily ended the call. Then, I began contacting other clients. What I uncovered was utterly terrifying. A month-long history of Max engaging with some of my most significant clients. He introduced himself as our partner, spouting mouthfuls of acronyms for highly specific services that we didn't even offer. One local restaurateur shared that Max had promised him a revolutionary AI-driven menu optimization system. Another said Max was pitching a blockchain-based loyalty program. Of course, we couldn't, and never intended to, deliver any of those things. My head reeled. This was far too much to be a coincidence, and it was certainly no case of mistaken identity. This was clear sabotage, premeditated, malicious intent. What was his motive? To destroy my business from within. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, I knew I had to talk to Zoe. I found her in our room, folding clothes. "We need to talk," I began. "It's about Max." Zoe sighed, clearly bracing herself for another argument. When I presented her with the damning proof, client emails and messages detailing Max's brazen conversations, a profound realization dawned in her eyes. "I don't understand," she murmured, sinking onto the bed. "Why would he do this?" I was close to tears myself when she finally believed me. Yet at that same moment, a wave of relief, mingled with profound sadness for the pain this was clearly causing her, washed over me. "Finally," I thought. "I don't know why, but we cannot let this continue." Zoe nodded slowly. "Enough," she whispered. "He has to leave." But when we confronted Max together, the situation only escalated. Initially, he vehemently denied everything, claiming the clients had misunderstood. But as we presented him with evidence, one damning piece after another, his demeanor quickly shifted. He accused me of turning Zoe against him, snarling, "You always thought you were better than all of us, didn't you? You're just scared because you know I could run this company better than you ever could." But he didn't stop there. Max even threatened to sue me for stealing his intellectual property, asserting that the ideas he'd shared while living with us were legally his, and he had recordings to prove I'd appropriated them. It was utter nonsense. Max had never shared a single remotely practical idea. Yet here he was, threatening a baseless lawsuit. The mere threat of legal action, however unfounded, was terrifying. We told him he had 48 hours to move out, or the authorities would be notified. Those 2 days were incredibly tense. Max relentlessly tried to guilt-trip Zoe, invoking their childhood memories and claiming she was betraying him. He also made veiled threats about ruining my reputation in the industry. But we stood our ground. To Zoe's immense credit, she didn't flinch. She was both deeply hurt and fiercely angry, but she stood strong beside me. On the morning he was scheduled to leave, we discovered Max was gone. He had departed during the night, absconding with some of our electronics and most of Zoe's jewelry. We found a note on the kitchen table that simply stated, "You'll regret this." We immediately filed a police report, but honestly, the chances of our stolen items being recovered are slim. The crucial thing is, he's out of our house and out of our lives. Zoe is profoundly upset. She now feels utterly betrayed by her own brother and is plagued by guilt for not having seen through him sooner. She incessantly repeats that she should have listened to me all along and should have noticed the signs. I'm doing my best to console her, reassuring her that Max's actions are not her fault. All the while, I'm simultaneously engaged in extensive client damage control. I've been making individual phone calls, sending personalized emails, and even conducting personal visits to apologize for the confusion and assure them that Max had absolutely no authority to make any promises regarding business deals. Most of my clients have been remarkably understanding, but I'm genuinely anxious about the long-term repercussions on my business's reputation. I've also been exploring legal options to thwart any future interference from Max. It's been a rather chaotic couple of weeks, but I believe Zoe and I are finally on the same page. We are genuinely united in this crisis, and in a strange way, it has brought us closer. Our communication has significantly improved, and we're talking more than we have in months. I'll keep you updated if anything major occurs. Update 2. A month has elapsed since Max's departure, and things are slowly beginning to return to a semblance of normalcy. I wanted to update everyone on the developments in my life. The good news, I managed to retain all my clients after literally a ton of phone calls, emails, and personal meetings. Mrs. Johnson, understandably, was quite upset by the confusion and had already threatened to move her business elsewhere. I was definitely on the verge of losing her. After a very lengthy lunch explaining the full situation and outlining a new, realistic marketing plan for her hotels, she graciously agreed to remain on board. In fact, this entire ordeal seems to have unexpectedly strengthened my relationships with certain clients who genuinely respected and valued my honesty and the effort I put into rectifying everything. A few even shared their own family business dramas, which offered some perspective. Legally, we consulted with a lawyer regarding Max's threats. There's no doubt Max possesses no legitimate grounds to assert an intellectual property claim. Any ideas he may have vaguely mentioned while living with us do not constitute his intellectual property, especially with no proof that I actually utilized any of his so-called ideas in my business. However, given Max's erratic behavior and threats, we did apply for a protective order. This legally prevents him from approaching our home or office, as well as contacting clients. We hope never to need to enforce it, but it's immensely reassuring to know the law is on our side. The police haven't had any breakthroughs in recovering our stolen belongings. They stated that unless items surface via a pawn shop or online sale, their hands are tied. We've moved past that now, though. We've significantly beefed up our home security and changed all our passwords and account information just to be safe. The most challenging aspect this past month has been helping Zoe process everything. She's been grappling with immense guilt and profound betrayal. Max wasn't merely her brother, he was her childhood hero. She's recounted stories of how Max used to let her tag along with his friends, how he empowered her to stand up for herself, how he encouraged her to pursue gymnastics when our parents desired a safe career. This starkly different side of Max has absolutely shattered Zoe's perception. She's been sleeping fitfully and is jumpy whenever the phone rings, constantly fearing it might be Max. She's also been poring over old family photos, as if desperately searching for clues she'd missed about the person Max would ultimately become. I've urged her to see a counselor to work through these intense feelings, but she remains quite resistant, claiming it's just a matter of time. I confess, I worry. I've tried my best to be there for her, but to be frank, it's been taxing. I can't help but feel a flicker of anger sometimes. After all, I saw through Max so much sooner. Then I remind myself that Zoe shared a deep, long history with Max, so her attachment isn't just a superficial relationship. Then, something entirely unexpected happened last week. We received a call from Max and Zoe's parents. Max had gone to their place and spun a completely fabricated story. In his version of events, he had conceived all the brilliant ideas, and I had stolen them. He claimed when he threatened to involve the police, that's when I'd asked him to leave. He portrayed himself as an innocent victim and Zoe as someone who had chosen me over her purebred brother. Zoe spent hours on the phone with her parents, painstakingly explaining what had truly transpired. They were just as stunned as Zoe. They, too, had always considered Max their golden child, the one destined for great things. The news of his subterfuge and theft deeply wounded them. Thankfully, in the end, They believed us. Showing them the concrete evidence of Max's actions made a significant difference. They apologized for their son's behavior and assured us that if Max ever contacted them again, they would immediately inform us. I recognize this was an incredibly difficult and draining conversation for Zoe, though I suspect it also brought her a sense of relief. It helped her realize she wasn't the only one Max had deceived. As for my business, I've implemented stringent measures to prevent a recurrence of such an incident. I've established very strict privacy guidelines and all. My employees now fully appreciate the necessity of discretion regarding our clients. There's also an heightened sense of caution about what and where I share work-related information at home. It's a shame it had to come to this before I could feel secure in my own home. But it did. It has indeed been a dreadful month, but I'm slowly starting to feel that things are gradually taking a turn for the better. Zoe and I are certainly communicating with each other more openly than ever before. And though the experience was profoundly painful, it ultimately brought us much closer. We've had numerous deep conversations about trust, mutual loyalty, family, dynamics, and our future together. I've also observed some positive shifts within my business. This crisis compelled me to critically examine my operations and client relationships. I've implemented new strategies that facilitate easier client communication and streamline workflow processes. It essentially pushed me to take actions I might otherwise have deferred. I'll post another update shortly if anything major develops concerning Max or legally. For now, we are moving forward, healing in our personal lives and fortifying my business. Update 3. 3 months have passed since my last update, and I wanted to share the final significant developments in this ongoing saga. The most impactful news is that Max was arrested 2 weeks ago. Fortunately, it wasn't for anything directly related to us, but for attempting the exact same scam on another small business owner in a neighboring city. Apparently, he hadn't learned his lesson and believed he could get away with his schemes. Again. We discovered this when we received a call from a detective who had been investigating Max's recent activities and stumbled upon our police report after he stole our belongings. He wanted to know if we'd be willing to provide a statement regarding our interactions with Max. After discussing it with Zoe, we agreed to cooperate fully with the inquiry. We spent an entire afternoon at the police station, recounting everything to the officers. I found it utterly exhausting to recall every detail, but simultaneously incredibly relieving. The detective informed us that we weren't the only victims Max had tried to exploit. They were aware of at least 3 other cases, all following a strikingly similar pattern. Max would ingratiate himself with small business owners, forcefully insinuate himself into their operations, and then either steal from them or usurp their client relationships. Zoe took the news of Max's arrest quite hard. After the detective hung up, I found her weeping in the bedroom. "I keep thinking about when we were kids," she told me. "How did he go from being my protective big brother to this?" Gradually, however, I believe the news and the days that followed brought Zoe a sense of peace with everything. It genuinely helped her realize that Max's culpability was not her fault. She has stopped flinching at every phone ring and now sleeps much, much better. The wonderful news is that Zoe finally relented and began seeing a counselor. She's had a couple of sessions now and says it's helping her come to terms with what truly happened. She's also been actively reconnecting with some old friends she lost touch with during Max's stay with us. I'm incredibly proud of her. These truly feel like significant steps towards healing. Now it's largely back to business as usual, and all the immense effort I invested in communicating with clients during those crisis weeks has truly paid off. In fact, I've even gained a couple of new clients referred by those who Max had initially targeted. It seems my handling of the situation was so impressive that they spread the word about my professionalism. Through this entire ordeal, Zoe and I have been able to engage in profound discussions about our future, realizing that being completely aligned on major life aspects, particularly family, is paramount. We've had numerous conversations outlining clearly defined strategies for handling family requests moving forward. We've also started to discuss how we envision structuring our own family unit. This whole experience has solidified our understanding that we are strong enough as a team and feel ready to embrace the challenge of parenthood. It's incredibly exciting to plan for what lies ahead, knowing it's not just about reacting to crises anymore. Last week, we finally managed to replace the TV Max had stolen when he left. While setting it up, Zoe turned to me and said, "You know, I'm actually glad he took the old one. This new one's much better. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded that we got through this together." It was a small comment, but it meant a lot. Looking back, as much of a struggle as this experience was, I truly believe it strengthened our relationship. We learned invaluable lessons about communication, trust, and how to stand united in the face of adversity. This has taught us that even within family, establishing firm boundaries is absolutely vital. And since then, we haven't heard a single word from Max. To be honest, we're perfectly fine with that. We're happily focused on each other and the life we're building together. Should he ever attempt to re-enter our lives, we will know precisely how to stand our ground together. A huge thank you to everyone for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and encouragement genuinely helped us carry on. It truly was a very tough time.